If you have ever sat down to play a game of chess and felt lost by move 3, this video is for you. Openings are not where chess games are won, but they are absolutely where they are lost. One bad decision in the first 5 moves, and you spend the rest of the game trying to survive instead of trying to win. In this video, I will talk about every opening you need to stop losing early. Playing as white. Almost every game at your level starts with one of 2 moves from white, pawn to e4 or pawn to d4. If you can handle these 2, you can handle the vast majority of games you will ever play. ELO 200, Italian game. Pawn to e4. Your opponent plays pawn to e5. You develop your knight to f3. They bring out their knight to c6, and you place your bishop on c4. 3 moves. You have a piece out, you control the center, and you are already thinking about castling. The Italian teaches you the 3 principles every opening should follow. Control the center, develop your pieces, protect your king. ELO 350, London system, pawn d4. You play knight to f3 and bishop to f4. Then you build with pawn to e3 and bishop to d3. That is essentially it. ELO 500, Queen's Gambit. You play pawn to c4, offering a pawn. Your opponent has 2 options. If they take, pawn takes on c4, you play pawn to e4, reclaiming the center with a powerful and active position. If they decline and hold on d5, you continue developing naturally with knight to f3, bishop to f4, or bishop to g5, and pawn to e3. Either way, your pieces flow out naturally, and your center stays strong. The London taught you patience. The Queen's Gambit teaches you how to use that patience to strike. ELO 600, King's Gambit. Pawn to e4. Your opponent plays pawn to e5. And now, instead of developing a piece, you play pawn to f4. You are offering a pawn on move 2. Take my pawn, you are saying, and let me have the center completely. If black accepts with pawn takes on f4, you play pawn to d4, and your center becomes enormous, 2 pawns controlling the heart of the board, and your pieces pour out with speed and aggression. If black declines, you still have a strong center and the initiative. You are giving up material to get a lead in development and launch an attack as fast as possible. ELO 700, Scotch game. Pawn to e4. Your opponent plays pawn to e5. Knight to f3, knight to c6. And here, instead of placing your bishop on c4 like in the Italian, you play pawn to d4. You are challenging the center immediately. After pawn takes on d4, your knight takes back on d4, and now the position opens up fast. Pieces become active, lines open, and the game gets sharp quickly. ELO 1700, Ruy Lopez. Pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6. And now, instead of pushing d4 like in the Scotch, you play bishop to b5. That is it. You are not attacking the knight directly. You are putting pressure on the entire chain of logic that keeps black's e5 pawn defended. If the knight moves or gets traded, that pawn becomes vulnerable. Playing as black. White and black have completely different jobs in the opening. White moves first, so white gets to set the tone. Black reacts and tries to find the best answer. Your opponent plays e4. What do? You have 2 main options. ELO 800, French defense. Pawn to e6. That is your first move. White plays d4, you play d5, and now you have a solid wall of pawns in the center that is very hard to break down. This is why the French comes first among the black responses to e4. It is the most straightforward way to say no to white's center. You build your own immediately. The one challenge the French presents is that your light-squared bishop can get locked behind your own pawns, so you need to find a way to activate it as the game develops. That is the puzzle the French gives you, and solving it is what makes you a better player. ELO 900, Caro-Kann. Pawn to c6. That is your first move. The plan is to follow up with pawn to d5 on the next move, challenging white's center directly, but without blocking your light-squared bishop, which is the problem black runs into with other defenses. White has a few ways to respond, but regardless of what they choose, your position stays healthy.
When you are playing black, your biggest challenge is surviving the opening without falling into a worse position.
Elo 1100, Sicilian defense. Pawn to c5. Instead of matching white's center or challenging it directly like the Caro-Kann, you are staking out space on the queen side and creating an asymmetrical position from move 1.
After white plays d4, you take with your c-pawn. White recaptures, and now you have traded a flank pawn for a center pawn, a small structural advantage that gives black real counterplay for the rest of the game.
That asymmetry is what makes the Sicilian the most played response to e4 at every level of chess. Once you are comfortable not mirroring your opponent and trust yourself to handle a complex position, this is your weapon.
Your opponent opens with d4. What do?
Elo 1200, Queen's Indian defense. Pawn to d4, knight to f6, pawn to c4. And now, instead of going to g6 like in the King's Indian, you play pawn to e6 and then pawn to b6, preparing to fianchetto your bishop to b7. You are not fighting for the center with pawns, you are controlling it with pieces. Your bishop on b7 fires down the long diagonal, pressuring the center from the side, and your knight on f6 keeps an eye on d5 and e4. The whole idea is to make white's center harder to build and easier to undermine.
Elo 1300, Nimzo Indian defense. Pawn to d4, knight to f6, pawn to c4, pawn to e6. And now you play bishop to b4, pinning white's knight on c3. You are not fighting for the center with pawns at all. You are using your bishop to control it, putting pressure on white's structure before they even have a chance to build it properly. If white plays pawn to e4, you take the knight on c3, doubling white's pawns and leaving a permanent weakness in their position. The Nimzo Indian teaches one of the most important ideas in modern chess, that piece activity and structural damage can be worth more than material. Elo 1400, King's Indian defense. You play knight to f6. White plays pawn to c4. You play pawn to g6, fianchetto your bishop to g7, and castle kingside. You are not fighting for the center immediately. You are letting white build it. Then, at exactly the right moment, you strike with pawn to e5, and the entire position explodes. This is the most counterintuitive opening on this list. Everything you learned before was about controlling the center early. The King's Indian tells you to do the opposite. Give your opponent the center, then destroy it. This is why the King's Indian is last on this list. It requires you to trust a plan that looks like you are losing for the first 10 moves. That takes experience, confidence, and a deep understanding of what activity and counterplay actually mean in chess.